Good morning, everyone. Today, I am going to be talking to you about my dissertation titled Lack of Health, Lack of Wealth. How does endometriosis contribute to existing gender inequalities in the UK labour market? On the agenda is the introduction, the literature review, the methodology, the results, the discussion, and the conclusion. I decided to focus my topic on endometriosis as I myself was diagnosed with endometriosis in November 2024. After an 8-year battle for doctors, employers, and friends to understand the condition that was going on inside me and how I was feeling and the impacts that this had on my life. After facing significant discrimination within employment, education, and general life, I wanted to turn my experiences into something that could help women alike. Exploring gender inequalities in the UK labour market resulted in me seeing that there were horizontal and vertical inequalities that impacted employment rates, type of employment, employment sector, pay and wage gaps, and career progression. Now, there are various theoretical explanations for gender market inequalities. However, the human capital theory, preference theory, and homophily, which are most commonly cited, all focus on personal choices of women and tendencies of women to network with women rather than looking at their circumstances. These theories argue that women prioritise a family over their career, which is why they are segregated into lower paid occupations and part-time work. However, they fail to consider circumstances which may lead to these decisions, as not all women choose to have a family. What is missing from the literature was this: endometriosis, which is a chronic condition affecting up to 1 in 10 women with an average diagnosis time of 8 years and 10 months in the UK. It is categorised by growth of endometriosal cells, which are similar to those growing in the lining of the uterus that migrate to other organs in the body. Symptoms can include debilitating chronic pain, extremely painful and irregular periods, and infertility. However, there are many more symptoms explored in the dissertation that are also part of endometriosis. I conducted a review of the available literature in the workplace, with the results shown on screen. As you can see, there was an incredibly low percentage of overall available articles. After applying exclusion criteria of a UK focus and endometriosis focus with peer review applied, only 7 articles were found to be available. Evidence from the USA, Australia, and New Zealand highlight that the disclosure of endometriosis in the workplace varies significantly. It was also found that endometriosis negatively impacted ability to work due to difficulty in managing symptoms, additional pressure to perform, exhaustion of sick leave, working less, and negative impact on career progression, with Gilmore finding that many women interviewed could not maintain full-time employment. This led me to answer the research question of how does endometriosis contribute and exacerbate existing gender inequalities in UK labour markets. I applied the following framework to my analysis to ensure that all bases were covered. The methodology. I used a qualitative methodology with unstructured interviews from 6 women with endometriosis, using the method of self-selection and snowball sampling. I also incorporated autoethnography, using my own experiences within this to gain a deeper understanding. I used a 6-step thematic analysis outlined by Brown and Clark to apply this to my results, whilst bearing in mind the ethical considerations of consent, transparency, right to withdraw, and reducing harm from participant research. The results were as follows. Step 1 required transcriptions of interviews, and I then coded these into 17 different codes outlined in Figure 8. These were then organised into 4 potential themes outlined in Figure 9, which were symptoms, perceptions, consequences, and interventions. Step 5 required the definition of the themes, symptoms being defined as the physical and mental impact of experiences with endometriosis, perceptions referring to the perception expectations as well as how people perceive those with endometriosis. Consequences looked at the external impact on the life of a woman with endometriosis, and interventions referred to the actions or lack of actions that were taken in an attempt to mitigate the negative symptomology and consequences of endometriosis. I produced a final thematic map in which the results were analysed in relation to their impact to gender inequalities, which were determined in the literature review. As you can see from here, there is complex interacting factors which impact different gender inequalities in the UK labour market. Employment rates were negatively impacted by endometriosis, with severe symptoms impacting ability to work. Sick pay was also a consequence of these symptoms, which resulted in some participants knowing or being let go from their jobs. Perceptions impacted employment rates as well, as some participants did not tell their employers about their endometriosis due to fear of perception and were not protected, therefore, under the Equality Act. There was also evidence that lack of interventions appeared to restrict ability for those with endometriosis to work, with some participants finding their employers were not disability friendly, with one having no access with a wheelchair and another manager complaining that her flexible work arrangements were not convenient for him. Employment type was also impacted by endometriosis, with 4 participants being forced into part-time employment due to their symptoms. Human capital was also impacted by this, which can lead to impacts in part-time and full-time work, with one participant nearly being unable to complete her degree. The lack of interventions also impacted full-time and part-time work, with some workers experiencing no flexible working patterns due to perceptions, and another having to complete an aggregate of 1 hour 30 minutes commute to attend an empty office on the basis of improving teamwork, which was one of the reasons why she ended up leaving her employment. The employment sector was deeply impacted by endometriosis, with one participant discussing how she loved hospitality, but endometriosis had destroyed any future that she had there. Another participant was forced to leave her degree speciality, which was in heritage sites, because she was unable to stand for long periods of time. Participants in demanding jobs had to repeatedly put work above health, which led them to worsening endometriosis symptoms, and some left the sector. There was not sufficient evidence within the interviews to be able to conclude the impact that endometriosis had on pay or wage gaps. Finally, career progression was also impacted by endometriosis, with symptoms of endometriosis resulting in lowered progression due to less additional jobs being completed and skills obtained. One participant described how a progression in hospitality was made impossible due to there being no possible option of flexible working. Participants experienced that they were denied opportunities due to their employer's perception of their endometriosis, which meant that decreased additional commitments led to lowered progression. So, the study findings are in line with those from the USA, Australia, and New Zealand. Financial inequalities were found to be significant within women with endometriosis, as often sick pay was not paid for and they had to take substantial pay and time off work. The definition of disability was explored, as significant impact is required on the life for 12 months in order to be considered a disability. However, some women who had just been diagnosed with endometriosis would not have been eligible for disability claims until this 12 months had passed. Extensions to previous theoretical explanations included the importance of including circumstance rather than simply choice within explanations of gender inequality, as women with endometriosis had no choice in their disease, merely in the circumstances that made them have it. This is important to be discussed in explanations for gender inequalities, as focusing the rhetoric on choice implies that no interventions are needed and that women choose their own inequalities. However, this is clearly not the case. Now, there were limitations of this study, namely due to the sample size. There were 12 participants recruited. However, due to the volatile nature of health inequalities and endometriosis, some participants were unable to participate due to deteriorations in their health. Further research is required to explore the triple disadvantage experienced by ethnic minorities who are also women who have endometriosis, as there was not enough data in this study to be able to come to suitable conclusions about the triple disadvantage. In conclusion, I'd like to conclude with the fact that this dissertation offers an additional explanation for gender inequality in the UK labour markets, attempting to add the rhetoric of circumstance to theoretical explanations rather than simply just choice of a family, which many women with endometriosis are declined in having due to infertility. Thank you so much for listening. The references are now presented on the slides as follows.